He commanded the strongest crew in the world. He split the ocean with his bare hands. He was called the strongest man alive, and no one seriously argued the title. But every single son he loved either died in front of him, ran from him, or broke under the weight of his name. That is the contradiction sitting at the center of Edward Newgate's entire life. Not his power, not his crew size, not Marineford. The contradiction is simpler and more painful than any of that. A man who could move the earth could not hold his family together. And the worst part is, he knew it. Whitebeard did not stumble into fatherhood the way most people stumble into things. He chose it, deliberately, with full understanding of what the sea does to people. He had seen enough death to know that strength without belonging is just violence with good posture. So he built something else. He called it family. He gave his name to men the world had thrown away. Pirates who had no flag, no home, no one who would ever mourn them. He said, "You are my sons now." And he meant it in a way that wasn't ceremonial. He meant it the way a man means something when he is willing to bleed for it. And he bled. Repeatedly. Publicly. At Marineford, in front of the entire world. But the tragedy was never Marineford. Marineford was just the place where the tragedy became impossible to ignore. The tragedy started decades earlier, the first time a son looked at Whitebeard's back and felt, not protection, but pressure. Because here is what no one says plainly enough about Whitebeard's crew. Being called his son was not a simple gift. It was a weight that came with a title, a flag, an expectation, and the knowledge that the whole world was watching your father. Some men carried that weight and became legends. Others cracked slowly under it, in ways that never made the history books. And then there was Ace, Portgas D. Ace arrived on the Moby Dick not as a broken man looking for belonging. He arrived swinging, 17 months trying to kill Whitebeard directly. That alone tells you something about Ace that most people skip over. Ace was not someone who needed a father in the way orphans in stories usually need fathers. He was someone who had already decided fathers were dangerous. His entire identity was built on the rejection of Roger's bloodline. And then Whitebeard, the one man in the world powerful enough to simply absorb the assassination attempts and waited. He did not crush Ace. He did not exile him. He did not prove a point. He just kept being there. Until Ace stopped swinging. Until Ace sat down. Until Ace ate. That moment, Ace eating at Whitebeard's table, is one of the quietest, most emotionally loaded scenes in One Piece. Because it wasn't surrender. It was the opposite of surrender. It was Ace, for the first time in his life, choosing to trust someone older than him. Whitebeard understood what he was receiving. He understood that Ace's loyalty, once given, would be absolute and catastrophic. He knew, on some level, that a son who burns that hot does not survive long in a world built on patience and calculation. And he took him in anyway. That is the first layer of the tragedy. Not that Whitebeard failed to protect Ace, but that he accepted Ace fully, knowing the sea does not negotiate with fire. Then came Marco, Jozu, Vista, the commanders who became pillars. These were sons who survived. Sons who found the weight manageable. But even they could not fill the specific silence that existed inside Whitebeard when no one was watching. Because Whitebeard's dream, the thing he said out loud at the end, dying on his feet, was never about conquest. It was about one person finding that map and continuing something. It was about legacy passing through a son's hands, not a war general's strategy. And every time a son died, or broke, or turned, that dream got quieter. Blackbeard understood Whitebeard better than most of his own sons did. Not emotionally, strategically. Teach watched the crew for years, learning one specific thing. He learned that Whitebeard's greatest vulnerability was not his declining health or his oxygen mask. It was that his sons would die for him without being asked. That loyalty was the weapon, and Teach built his entire plan around pulling that trigger. When Teach killed Thatch, he was not just committing murder inside the crew, he was setting a fire and waiting to see which son would run into it. Ace ran, exactly as Teach calculated. And here is where the tragedy sharpens into something almost unbearable. Ace did not chase Teach because he was reckless, in a simple way. He chased Teach because his identity was still not fully stable. Ace had accepted Whitebeard as father, but he had not yet accepted himself as a son worthy of that name. Stopping Teach was, in Ace's psychology, a way of proving he deserved his place at that table. Whitebeard knew this. He told Ace not to go. Not as a commander giving an order. As a father recognizing a wound he could not close in time, Ace went anyway, and Whitebeard let him, because he also understood something harder. You cannot cage the thing you love without destroying what made it worth loving. That is the second layer of the tragedy. Whitebeard could stop oceans. He could not stop his son from needing to prove himself. Then Marineford happened, and the world watched something that had no historical parallel. An emperor of the sea, dismantling his body piece by piece, just to buy his son one more moment of survival. This was not a war strategy. Whitebeard did not come to Marineford to win. He came because the alternative, sitting on the Moby Dick while Ace died, was not something his body would physically allow. By the time he arrived, the oxygen tube was gone. His body was already failing. He took cannon blasts, blade wounds, and hockey strikes not to demonstrate power. He took them because stopping meant Ace died faster. And when Ace died anyway, standing in front of a Kainu, burning for Luffy, Whitebeard felt something break inside him that no devil fruit and no crew loyalty could explain. Because Ace did not die protecting the crew. Ace died protecting a brother Whitebeard had never officially adopted. Monkey D. Luffy, who had no tattoo, no flag, no position inside the Whitebeard structure. And that detail matters enormously if you are actually reading the scene. Ace's deepest loyalty, at the final moment, was to the bond that existed before Whitebeard. It was to Luffy, to Dawn Island, to a sake cup and a childhood promise. Whitebeard was the father Ace chose, but Luffy was the brother Ace was. And the tragedy is not that one bond was more real than the other. The tragedy is that Whitebeard built something true and genuine, and the world still found the exact seam where it could break him. Whitebeard died standing. That part everyone remembers. 270 sword wounds, 267 bullet wounds, 46 cannonball wounds, no scar on his back. He never ran. But that final image, and this is what most people emotionally skip, is not a victory image. It is a grief image dressed in the clothes of strength. He died having saved almost none of the sons who needed saving most. Thatch was gone. Ace was gone. Teach had betrayed him. The crew survived, but the dream, the quiet dream of legacy through a son's hands, died in Marineford's ash. And the One Piece world moved on, the way it always moves on. New powers rose, the hierarchy reshuffled, the empty sea filled with new voices. But if you understand what Whitebeard was actually building, not an empire, not a military structure, not a power-scaling achievement, then the silence he left behind is not the silence of a defeated man. It is the silence of someone who understood love at a scale the world was not designed to protect. The strongest man alive could split the sea, shake the earth, and hold his ground against every force the Marines assembled. He could not save his sons from the version of themselves that the world kept creating. That was never a failure of power. That was the cost of caring too much, too openly, in a world that treats love like a target.